Thank you for joining us today, everyone. My name is Kenneth Javier Rosales. I'm the program manager at SBA Home, and we're so excited to host you all for a conversation we're super excited to have about Proposition 5, which is a small but powerful amendment to the state's constitution that will be on your ballot in November, and the real impacts it can make in communities throughout our county. Prop 5 will enable local communities to pass more affordable housing and infrastructure bonds. This is a crucial structural change to give voters and communities the ability to meet their own needs for housing, transit, emergency services, and more. So just if you're new to policy in action at home, this series is a monthly informal discussion convening housers to engage on hot housing topics. So every month we select a topic or a current event. We bring in an expert or two or more to give a brief presentation and then open up the discussion to ask questions, vote new ideas, and identify potential areas for shared action. Next slide, please. Before we start though, I want to give an acknowledgement to the traditional, ancestral, unceded territory of the Muwekma Ohlone, Ramaytush Ohlone, Kami Nation, and Amamutsan, on which we are learning, working, and organizing today. We're committed to honoring and making visible the indigenous people and tribes that were intentionally displaced from their land, who remain here in Silicon Valley and are a part of our community. Next slide, please. I would also like to share our ground rules and code of conduct. We want to ensure that the conversations and relationships here today remain respectful and productive. Please be kind and courteous to each other. No rude comments or personal attacks. We encourage asking questions and listening as we learn and engage with each other. Please remember that today's event is focused on the potential impact of Prop 5. Please keep questions and chat on topic. Sometimes the chat can get a little lively if you find that it is distracting you from the content of the discussion. We encourage you to consider closing the chat temporarily. If a person is disruptive or otherwise violates the code of conduct, they may be removed with or without warning. So now I will hand it over to our moderator for today's discussion, SBA Home's very own Executive Director, Regina Celestin. Take it away, Regina.
Thank you, Kenneth. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Regina Celestin Williams, and I lead SBA at Home, whose mission is to build our collective power and advocate for systems change to achieve housing affordability and justice in Santa Clara County. We, through the SBA at Home Action Fund, are a part of the grassroots work to get Prop 5 passed. And so I'm excited to have this rich discussion today about California's Proposition 5. We're going to begin today with a short briefing on Prop 5, the amendment to the state constitution that is on your ballots today. You should have received your ballots in the mail at the beginning of October. And so with just a few days left, please be sure to get them in no later than the 5th of November. So we don't have much time. We're getting really close to the election. And then we'll have two amazing guests join us today, both of whom work in different ways to serve folks in Santa Clara County who need access to a safe, stable, affordable home. They will share with us why Prop 5 is so important to their work and the communities they serve. Then we're going to close with discussion and take some questions from you all. So with that, we're going to go ahead and get started with our presentation on Prop 5. Next slide, please. So our state is facing serious challenges, and we know we need not only solutions, policy solutions, but we need resources to address these challenges. In Santa Clara County, 71% of renters with extremely low income pay more than half of their income each month on housing. So we have folks who are living in our communities who really need affordable housing. And as we all come together around solutions, we're looking for resources to really fund these solutions and help the housing be realized. There's also critical infrastructure like roads, bridges, and water systems that we need in order to protect our families, strengthen our communities, create resilience, and all of those can be supported by Prop 5. Next slide, please. So right now, the challenge is that just 34% of the electorate can stop the funding measures we need in our communities from passing. Those of us who understand the resources that are needed and want to see those changes happen can be outvoted, outdetermined by just 34% of voters. That's a minority. So Prop 5 will let local voters approve bonds for affordable housing, public infrastructure, emergency response, with a 55% vote. That's still a supermajority, and it would be an oversight. And this is the same threshold that we've had with school bonds since 2000. So Prop 5 is really what we need to address the challenges that we see in our communities when we have the consensus to do so. Next slide, please. And as we, build up the ability in our local communities to be able to pass these bond measures, Prop 5 is already including the real community oversight that's necessary to make sure that these resources are used responsibly. So it includes the requirement that every year there be an independent performance audit that's conducted and published, and an independent financial audit that would be submitted to the California State Auditor for review. It includes the requirement to appoint a citizens oversight committee to ensure any bond funds as a result of Prop 5 are spent only for the purposes described in the measure that the voters have approved. And it would also require, it would also provide oversight committee members with training about bonds and fiscal oversight. So this is an opportunity for the community to have a more oversight of how bonds are spent responsibly in their local jurisdictions. Next slide, please. And here in Santa Clara County, we have the benefit of Measure A, which passed in 2016, as a model for how we can do this. We'll talk later about how Measure A was passed with a 2/3 majority, but it included the commitment and the goal of delivering 4,800 units of affordable and supportive housing in Santa Clara County. And as of June 30th of this year, we've seen that we have the pipeline through the investment from Measure A to meet those goals. And we've basically met them with 4,777 units counted towards that goal that's already built. So we see a successful model in our county in being able to responsibly utilize the funds for the purpose designated and measure that accomplishment with local oversight. And Measure A has also leveraged an additional $3.9 billion in state, federal, and local and private resources. So it's been a huge success. Next slide, please. We have a real challenge to being able to create the change the transformational change that we want to see in our communities when it comes to creating communities that are strong, resilient, and thriving. California voters want to support building more affordable housing and investing in that supportive housing, investing in public infrastructure like roads and transit, water and fire stations. We see that because in our recent history, as our elected leaders have put forth various bonds and various measures, those measures have been really challenging to bring to pass at the 2/3 requirement to bring the resources that we need to be able to create the communities that we want, the majority of us want. And so this is just an example of the recent history of how, as we continue to see, this is what we need to invest in to create a community that better works for the people who live here. Those measures haven't moved forward because of needing that to meet that much higher bar at 66.67% of the electorate. Next slide, please. And because of this, because there's so much consensus around what we need to do to create these stronger communities, Prop 5 is supported by a myriad of partners, hundreds of organizations across representing many different constituents like seniors and veterans, working families and small businesses, faith communities and housing advocates, and many, many more. This is a diverse, dynamic coalition that is behind Prop 5 because of the fact that what we have now is undemocratic, and we have the opportunity to create a California where local communities can bring the resources, generate the resources they need, and solve the challenges in their own communities. So next slide, please. I think that's it. So with that, we're going to jump into the discussion today. This is so critical, especially for someone like me, because I am confident that producing more affordable housing and preserving existing affordable housing is what our community needs. I myself would not be here today if it was not for the safe and stable community that was created by affordable housing for my own family. I was born and raised in the Barretts of Richmond, California, which is a residential community of over 170 homes for low-income residents in Richmond. It is public housing. Not only did I make my most fond memories growing up there, like learning to ride a bike, having a sleepover, getting my hair braided 2 doors down, walking to public transportation to take BART to get to school. But all of these memories are grounded in home, mine and my family's home, and permanently affordable homes. So with that, I'm really excited to introduce our special guest today. First, we have David Lowe, who brings more than a decade of public policy and strategic communications experience to Destination Home's work to end homelessness in Silicon Valley. Prior to joining Destination Home, David served as a senior advisor and communications director to San Jose's Mayor Sam Liccardo, where he was involved in the mayor's efforts to combat Silicon Valley's homelessness and housing affordability crises. He also spent a number of years working on the team of former Mayor Chuck Reed, as well as the nonprofit sector, including as marketing and communications director for the YMCA of Silicon Valley and regional communications director for Breathe California. David grew up in Silicon Valley and is an alumnus of UCLA, where he earned a dual bachelor's degree in political science and communications studies. Welcome, David. We also have Roma Dawson. She serves as co-president of the League of Women Voters Bay Area, with a housing and homelessness portfolio. The League of Women Voters Bay Area advocates on regional issues for the 20 local leagues in the 9-county Bay Area. She also chairs the Housing and Homelessness Committee of her local league, San Jose, Santa Clara. Roma has an extensive background as a policy analyst and chief of staff for several City of San Jose elected officials and worked for Representative Zoe Lofgren in her district office. She has held marketing positions with the San Jose Downtown Association and San Jose Conventions and Visitors Bureau. After retirement, Roma joined the board of the San Jose Parks Foundation. She is a former member of the San Jose Arts Commission and now serves on the San Jose Housing and Community Development Commission. Welcome, Roma, and thank you for your service.
Thank you.
So, I know that you all are both really excited about this conversation because we get to talk to folks who are going to be talking to more folks in the days leading to the election about Prop 5. Let's start with talking a little bit about Measure A. Both of you were around and involved in Measure A, and you've stayed involved. As we showed on the slides, that particular housing bond passed in 2016 with the two-thirds voter support that was necessary. It showed that we had such a strong community support for affordable housing and addressing homelessness right here in Santa Clara County. What are the lessons that we learned from passing and implementing Measure A?
Well, I'll begin if that's okay. And thank you for mentioning it because it gives me a chance to brag a little bit about the League of Women Voters. There are 5 local leagues in Santa Clara County, and we were all in on Measure A. We supported that $950 million bond measure, and we decided very early on that we needed, when we said we were all in, we needed to walk our talk, and that meant we recruited volunteers. We told people to phone bank, and most importantly, just talk to your own network of family and friends, and don't presume that anybody is on board with it. Because of course, you say $950 million, most people get weak in the knees when they hear those kinds of sums. What we also felt that the league really was strongly championing this measure because of the transparency and disclosure in it. And that is the league's wheelhouse. Measure A clearly defined the categories where how that $950 million would be divided, how it would be split up, very simply, easy to understand. And most importantly, they did it prior to the vote. So we could go out as volunteers, as folks campaigning, and explain to people what's going on. And you mentioned that now I'm on a regional board, which does advocacy in the 9 counties, Bay Area wide. And we are holding up Measure A citizen oversight as the platinum model. And we are touting it everywhere we go to talk about citizens oversight, because we believe that's the pathway to competence in government. So again, transparency, oversight, that's League's wheelhouse. And again, I want to thank you for pointing out its success, and it received an incredible grand jury report. In fact, I believe it's the most glowing, positive grand jury report I ever read over all the decades of reading grand jury reports that come to the notice of city officials. And of course, I'm very honored to be here with David, who's a former colleague and somebody I really rely on for advice frequently.
Oh, you're too sweet, Roma. The feeling's mutual, and good to see everybody. I just really want to a couple lessons, I think, from Measure A, and one really that you can't overemphasize the importance of that transparency. We are asking for the trust of the voters and the community. And as Roma said, Measure A, it's not only Measure A, but it's become a model. And so one thing that is great, and you see in most bond measures going throughout the state and elsewhere, is you're having that kind of oversight there, which gives voters confidence. And it relates to the other point from the P lesson is we can do this. We can implement big, bold measures like Measure A, that is a significant sum of money, and deliver on it. So you heard the stats that Regina mentioned earlier, 5,800 homes that we funded. About half, just under half of them are already open, providing safe, affordable homes to families, individuals in our community, and more are on the way. So I really do think it's an important success story, in that combination of having the foresight, the ability to say exactly how you're going to spend the money, and the transparency shows that you can do it. And it's something that's great about, I think we're seeing adopted with more bonds. And one of the reasons I personally, as someone who's fairly fiscal conservative, feels better about voting for these bonds. I think the other just important lesson I want to emphasize, Regina mentioned earlier from the lesson, is it is really, really hard to pass a 2/3 measure, right? So she alluded a little bit to it. I was involved there. Measure A had everything going for it when it was on the ballot. Had broad institutional support, elected officials' endorsements, labor, business, community groups on it. Everybody was on it. It was one of the more impressive community campaigns I've seen happening as far as fundraising and mobilizing people, and we barely got it passed, right? Just at 67% or so.
Yeah.
So I think it just speaks to how high of a threshold it is. Thank God we got Measure A over the ballot, but so many others are not having that luck. And so it's one of the reasons I think we need to be rethinking about what that threshold set, but also for those of you who are wondering what you're going to do in the next couple of weeks, why we should have that same lesson in mind as we think about how we're mobilizing to get Prop 5 over the goal line as well.
Yeah, David, you touch on something really important when you're talking about, what that local coalition looks like. Funding sources target the priority of whomever passes them. So can you both tell us a little more about the real benefits of a bond measure when it comes to locally led, run, and controlled? Roma, do you want to jump in here?
Sure. And actually now you're starting to talk about my favorite things about Prop 5, because to me, it restores local control and power to local jurisdictions to make their own decisions and determine their own priorities. Now, of course, I live in the city of San Jose, and just listening to what I've heard stated publicly, we must be well on our way to $1.5 billion, at least, maybe more, of infrastructure backlog. How are we going to deal with that with a 2/3, almost impossible to reach threshold? And you showed the data. Thank you for putting those slides up. We get so close, but getting that last little increment is just almost impossible. My local league, actually, we represent San Jose, Santa Clara, Milpitas, Morgan Hill, and Gilroy. So I don't have to leave my local league to understand that the needs of affordable housing, infrastructure needs of all kinds vary greatly locally among these different jurisdictions. And with this very unrealistic standard of 2/3 vote, as you've already explained so well, a passage of Prop 5 restores that to what's realistic, a 55%. And I have the privilege of being in public service for several decades now, and I think about the community meetings I've helped to lead, or the community meetings where I've participated in, or even I was just at a League of Women Voters national convention back in DC. What if we had divided that room up and said, okay, this 1/3 sitting over here gets to decide what the other 2/3 get to do? There would have been a riot.
Yep.
There would have been a riot.
I love that example because, when we talk about passing some of these measures, you think about, oh, they're going to bring transformational change, and change feels hard and scary. And there's some people who are resistant to change. But if we look at how our valley, how our community has changed over time, and where we could have stepped in as a community to invest resources so that we don't have a backlog of infrastructure needs, and so that we don't have, a lack of housing for almost everyone, that's affordable. If you can step in and make those changes as you need them as a community, then we won't have to experience the difference between, a Silicon Valley where people were able to live and thrive here, and what we have now where so many folks are getting pushed out. David, we've had some really heartbreaking near misses with local measures. And you were in City Hall in the mayor's office when Measure V was put on the ballot in the city of San Jose. Can you tell us what happened and briefly sort of talk about what Measure V would have meant for this community?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so I think some of you saw on your slide before, this is one of the ones that just fell short, right? So it was 2018. The city was grappling with, at that point, what we thought was still just a slowly growing homelessness crisis, but growing. Housing affordability was getting much worse. And we were also probably maybe, what, at that point, 5 years after the dissolution of redevelopment agencies, which for some of you know was the main way cities had funded affordable housing. So those dollars were just gone. And we were looking at this and realizing our housing crisis was only going to get worse if we didn't find a way to raise more funding. And of course, this came after Measure A, but Measure A wasn't going to solve it all, right? We knew we needed more funding. And back to kind of the earlier question, one of the great things if you do a local bond is that you not only have control of how it's going to be spent, and I plus one everything Roma said, but also it helps you unlock state and federal dollars. Because a lot of times you can only get that if you're putting local dollars in. So you qualify for other pots for money, and you have a 2 to 3 time magnifying effect about bringing dollars back to your community. So for all those reasons, we said, we got to do this. We got to make sense. We need these housing dollars. And we went in. And the crazy thing was, it started off in a very similar way as Measure A did. We had all the institutional support. I think it was near unanimous support put on the ballot. We had business, we had labor, we had community organizations. We had a great support on it. But the thing that I've personally seen as I've looked at this is, in our society today, it's getting harder and harder to get people to agree on anything. So even though we had all the same recipes for success, we came up short, 64% that time, and you saw the list of other places on things that seem pretty much no-brainer consensus issues, fire protection, school bonds, that are falling short. And I think that just speaks to how hard of a threshold 2/3 is. And, you know, when this question was going to tee up, I was actually just kind of reminiscing back to that campaign. And it did remind me of one kind of random thing that happened. It was during a time, as we all know, that our schools are facing some difficulties. And at the time, Stanza Unified was having to face those tough choices about, are we going to close some campuses? And at the same time, as other schools, and they're not the only one, but they were having that conversation, other school districts were talking about the potential to support teacher housing. And somewhere out there in the rumor mill that happens in these campaigns, it talked about, oh, Measure B must be all about closing our schools and, you know, building teacher housing on them. And we, of course, was not the case. And we spent an enormous amount of time trying to counter that myth. And I can't claim here whether that was a factor or not, but it just reminds you in any one of these campaigns, those things happen. And when you have a threshold that's so high that you need everything to go right, like we did in Measure A, just to squeak it out, any one of these things can kill it. And so it's one of the main reasons I personally, I know a lot of other people out there are thinking we need to rethink that threshold and have something more like what we have for school bonds right now.
I love that example because it also emphasizes that Prop 5 is so brilliant because it doesn't allow for those divisions, right? It is about there is no increased taxes as a result of Prop 5. It is about allowing communities to determine the needs of that community, whether it's housing or, road improvements or libraries or parks, or it's not even or, it's all of the above. It's really allowing for us as a coalition to show that we are not competing with these other community needs. We realize that we need to give power back to our local jurisdictions, our local community members, the residents who live there, the folks who are voting, to determine what their community needs. And you don't have to choose. It really is and it's a brilliant approach. It's really about making sure that California is sustainable for the long term and working for everyone. Roma, did you live in San Jose, you've done a lot of this work. Do you have anything to add about how heartbreaking Measure V was?
I will tell you, Measure V was a heartbreaker. I was retired, so I didn't have to live the pain quite as intensely. But, since I've been around going back to literally the mid 1980s, I can remember at least 3 times when the city's budget has sort of crashed because of what's going on a national level. Of course, we all remember the Great Recession we lived through. And what most people don't realize is that there are tremendous lost opportunity costs When we can't pay for infrastructure over time, the cost increases dramatically. Not to mention how much money we spend on campaigns and how many resources we divert to fight these ferocious battles to get this nearly unattainable source. Again, I don't want to belabor the fact, but again, it's just a completely unrealistic standard. And I'm going to brag a little bit about the League of Women Voters. Most of us think of us just when it comes to election matters, but at a state level, we are blessed with a very deep bench on fiscal policy. We opposed the original Proposition 13 back in the early 1970s, because we said, I wasn't a league member till I retired, so I'm kind of a newbie in league, but the old timers tell me that we knew there were going to be unintended fiscal consequences that we could not calculate due to it. And so it's those of us right now and those of us who are still laboring at county level, city level, special jurisdictions that now have to deal with all this and figure out where the money's going to come from. And when my family and friends start complaining about, high taxes, well, nobody wants to pay higher taxes, but there's no free lunch. I mean, it costs money to do things, and the choice is to do nothing and not have the services you need, not have the infrastructure you need, or have a realistic standard. So I really thank you for driving home that point, Regina.
And what I hear you saying is that when it comes to Prop 5, we can't afford not to pass it.
Absolutely.
The state
Absolutely
can't afford it. There's been too many losses. There's been too much harm done already, and we can't afford not to pass this measure and really allow our local jurisdictions to do the work that we've set them up to do. I love that. Okay, so Measure V, lots of strong, broad support in the city of San Jose, but it didn't pass. And then the city of San Jose went back to voters in 2020 with Measure E. This was our opportunity to have a long-term solution around affordable housing, generating funds that we could invest into building housing and a community that was affordable to everyone. David, what was the difference between how Measure E works, compare how Measure A worked?
Yeah, so after our experience with Measure V, which came so close, had strong support, but just kind of have the threshold, we had to rethink our approach, right? And this kind of goes back to the thing I said and my personal pessimism of like how we're ever going to get 2/3 consensus on anything as a society, but that's for another day. But as a city, we said, like, if we still need the revenue, we know people support housing, what are our other options? And what they decided, and I'll be fully transparent, we thought was the best option plan at the time was, let's put a general tax measure on the ballot, because in those you only need a simple majority. Let's put a general tax measure on the ballot, which will have no legal guardrails on how you spend it, but then let's put a very clear signal out to the community that we want this to go for housing. And I think all three of our organizations, many of you are listening out there, got there in support of it, and we did pass it, right? We got over that 50% threshold, 53, 54%. And in the beginning, it started going to housing. But because it was a general tax, the council had the ability to change it however they wanted to. And that's exactly what we've seen over the past couple of years. And it won't be surprising to you paying attention. Destination Home has had serious concerns about the disinvestment of affordable housing for Measure E for other strategies. But put that aside for a minute. Put that aside about how you think you would shift about it. I think it's just the reality we have to see is that local governments will go through differing priorities and different yeses and nos. And so it's inevitable you're going to see money shifted around. Maybe sometimes that's a good thing. But if we're going to think about trying to tell the voters specifically how we're going to spend the money, you can't do it with these general tax, no matter how many other strings you put on it. And so it leaves you in this very tough binary conversation. For those of us who think it's good to be very specific and lock in and tell your voters how you're going to spend the money when you do it, you have an unreachable threshold. Or you have to go around this other approach where we've seen it go and money be going from different ways. And so I think there are some times you're going to need general tax measures, but when we're talking about addressing big long-term problems where you need ongoing sustainable sources of funding, which is what we need to solve our housing and homelessness crisis, what we need to do to address long-term infrastructure needs, what we need to do to repair our schools, You should be able to tell people what you want. You should be able to lock it in, and we need to have a threshold that doesn't let a small minority of people block the progress we need.
Yeah, this continues to just support the fact that people want to understand what they're voting for when there's a bond measure. People want to know that if they and their neighbors and everyone down the street, and there's this big coalition and it's diverse and there's consensus and there's a super majority, that it's going to happen, and they're going to see those resources to be invested in what's important in that community, and that a minority of folks can't stop it, and that it can't just be changed into another sort of focus or priority. Roma, you're a part of the oversight for Measure E.
Yes. Yeah, this is a little bit personally painful for me to talk about Measure E, but I'm going to do it anyway because I think folks need to hear this. Of course, the city of San Jose designated the Housing Community Development Commission as the oversight committee. But really what we do is we only hear a report on how the money's been spent once a year. It's about a month out before it's going to come to its first council committee and then to council. And it's not a deep dive. And it's most definitely not any kind of an audit. And what happened with Measure E is that it said we'll have an annual audit. Well, that annual audit is now folded into the annual city budget audit. And David, I can't remember the name of it, but we see it every year, the annual city budget audit. So it's really one of hundreds of pages. And so is that effective citizens oversight? Maybe not. And again, you've already explained, and David mentioned, it was a general purpose tax. League was well aware of that. We were well aware that the city council could fill potholes with that money if they wanted to. Literally, legally, there would be no recourse. They can spend it for anything they want because it goes right into the general fund. And of course, I personally said, oh, but look what council did. We can support this measure because there's a council policy and it takes 2/3 to change these percentage allocations on the council policy. Well, we can all respectfully disagree. David alluded to this. That's a topic for another day about whether those reallocations were the right thing or the wrong thing, or frankly, just what they felt they needed to do at the time. But the point is that I kind of felt like, hey, the league is out there. My face is out there saying, okay, this is what's going to happen. And maybe we needed to talk a little bit more about what a general purpose tax means. And again, the current mayor then credited League of Women Voters as being a tipping point, in fact, in Measure E being successful. So I will tell you that this is a topic of conversation within the local league about what we're going to do in the future. Again, what I love so much about Prop 5 is there were 3 different pieces of legislation that went through, and I'm part of a state team monitoring it. It was difficult to follow all the way through. There were a lot of changes, but I think it ended up in a really good place. And now we have that certainty. If you pass by 55%, you're going to know exactly where your money's going. And to me, that's League's wheelhouse: transparency, accountability.
And Roma, you've been crystal clear about this, that the League of Women Voters champions robust community oversight. But I think for the average person, we'd love to just hear you talk a little bit more about why is this oversight so important?
Well, for us, and I'm talking now, of course, state legislation is all approved by a very active group of legislative analysts. I participate in housing and homelessness legislation, goes to a legislation committee. If it's a ballot measure, it goes to the full board. There's a lot of vetting that goes on. But we at League Bay Area were very involved in a regional housing bond measure, and I don't want to dwell on it. It had to be pulled from the ballot for good reasons at the last minute. But what I never got to talk about publicly, and what I want to share with everybody today, is that my Bay Area board fought very hard behind the scenes to have the kind of measure site that citizens oversight committees that were empowered by Measure A. And again, we sent volumes of staff reports, documentation about what we thought worked, didn't work. And we were very close to being able to bring that about publicly. And we're committed. There are, you know, 2 potential measures that may come forward, and they'll evolve over the next couple of years. And we're going to continue to fight that standard. And State League is absolutely committed to doing that. And what I really appreciate so much about Prop 5, especially in this third sort of technical implementation of Prop 5, AB 2813 that came about, were all these additional guardrails that came in for citizen oversight. And if you read it, there's fabulous verbiage in there about saying citizen oversight committees, you know, you must train them. You must give them all the resources they need. It must be publicly available, easy to find. And we are deeply and passionately committed to that. And in fact, we hope to do many more programs out in 2025, because the Citizens Oversight Committees, COCs, as we now lovingly call them, are only as good as the citizens that sit on them. So we're going to do some education around that. And I hope SV at Home and all the organizations listening will help us promote that. But we believe that is the on-ramp. That's the way we get back to restoring confidence in government. And we at League, we're a broad tent. When these measures come up for our study, believe me, we have got folks there that are anti any kind of tax. We have robust, vigorous discussions, but we are all convinced that the way to restore faith in government is, again, vigorous, independent. Let me stress that word. You mentioned it earlier, Regina, and thank you for getting that. Independent citizens oversight.
And if I could just add, because I think that's really important, if we look at what Prop 5 is, why it's such a smart strategy, it's addressing this issue holistically from that. We're putting more power back and control of local communities to decide when it makes sense. And we're saying, while having that more reasonable standard, we're also making sure that all those bonds are going to have that oversight that we're doing as a matter of course here in our community, but statewide, we'll make sure that happens. And so it really is more about empowering and leaving the question up to the communities to decide what they need so that we can address some of these really big problems we have.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Okay, for those of us watching, this is our chance to drop questions in the chat for our 2 panelists. We are going to attempt to sum this all up. So Prop 5, it doesn't cost us anything. It doesn't raise money on its own. Can you both sum up why Prop 5 is so important? Given the past experience we've covered, what are we as a community going to be able to do differently?
Well, obviously wearing my League hat, I'm going to say citizens oversight, but I have to tell you personally, for me, the thing that is so important after so many years of navigating the city's budget is the flexibility. And Regina, thank you for pointing that out. We all as housing advocates we're drilling in on what it does for interim supportive housing, the flexibility to keep people housed. But again, when I first retired, I joined the San Jose Parks Foundation because I'm woefully aware of the backlog in San Jose parks and the inequitable treatment. I believe something just hit the press today, the inequality that exists in San Jose City parks. And we need to do something about that. So again, flexibility for me personally, again, empowering local people to make their own choices. And of course, not to get too wonky, and Regina, I defer to you to answer any questions about this, but in my role in HCDC, when you start talking about capitalized operating reserves and keeping people housed, which is the most cost-effective thing we can do, that's really personally important to me. So again, apologies, I wear a lot of hats. I've worn a lot of hats.
No, you're wearing them well. They look good on you. David?
There's a lot of reasons to press Prop 5, but when I think about it, I think we're at a certain moment of time here, right? And I think what we have unfortunately done as a society is take the short-sighted, easy way out, and we just keep pushing problems down the road. And you sacrifice a little bit of short-term pain, but it just grows bigger and so much harder to solve. And I think that's where we are with our housing and homelessness crisis. think that's where we are on why we haven't invested in our schools and the things we need to protect against climate change. Wearing my old hat on, was helping out our pension problem back then. And so we really need to look at ourselves and say, how are we as a community come together and start really tackling those concerns? And sometimes that means making those smart, long-term investments up front, which will help us actually avoid problems or actually solve them instead of pushing it down. And by the way, if we can do it, we're going to do it in a much more effective, quicker, and cheaper way than if we let it go. And doing that is getting a lot harder to do. So we need to have these structural changes that really lets us address the heart of the problem, take control of as a community, and decide our path. That's what I think Prop 5 represents, and it gives our community back the tools to solve the problems ahead of us.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree with both of you more. I feel like Prop 5 is really about allowing folks who are living, working, voting in their community to be more engaged in how they see their community, what they see their community invest in, to be engaged on that sort of level and understand that when I voted for this, and I was in the majority of who voted for this, I can see that those dollars are generated and able to go to the things that I care about. And that therefore, I'll care about them more. I'll be more invested. I'll pay more attention. It's really about having that power locally that comes from civic action and involvement. Yeah. And that's really exciting. Especially as we're on the eve of this election, to think about how we can be a city, a county, a state that allows for folks to more easily participate in shaping their own neighborhood, their street, their community. So with that, I'm going to move on to some questions that we have in the chat. So again, this is a great opportunity for folks to drop questions in the chat. The first one says, how can affordable housing improve medical access and social determinants of health? And can Prop 5 help with other forms of access to healthcare?
I can take a stab at this. I think at a big picture level, one thing that the research consistently shown for a while, but we're seeing more of it, is how intricately tied having stable housing is to a person's, an individual's, a family's, and even a community's health. And that when we as a community invest in affordable housing at the macro level, or when we're helping more people get to it, those people are healthy. So, there's a phrase that always says that housing is healthcare, and I wholeheartedly believe it. So I think, when we think of investing in affordable housing and passing housing measures, that will inherently have a benefit for health. I think the other thing that part of it there that people should be aware of is a lot of the housing we're building, particularly when we're talking in my realm, right, for people who are extending homelessness, we're integrating wraparound services. It's kind of called the supportive housing model. And that has been shown to be wildly successful, helping people stay housed, stabilize, and really thrive. So I think it's, the big level, these two things are integrated. You also got to remember that in Prop 5, we're not just talking about housing. That's why we're all here and we care about it, but it addresses other type of infrastructure bonds. So you can talk about hospitals and things like that. But these are all important things. I think all of the big community needs we need, Prop 5 will help give us the power back to do something about it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, just ditto to what David said, and I will tell you all, we believe so strongly in this at League Bay Area. We just did a program entitled Is Housing Healthcare? And we firmly believe it is. And I would refer you to our website. We have a whole series that's focused on healthcare, because we believe that that's really the underpinning of all of our mission. Climate change, whatever you're talking about, healthcare is there and important. So LWV Bay Area, you'll find it on our website or on a YouTube channel.
Great, thank you. The next question says, okay, Prop 5 passes. Now what? What's the most immediate practical step we can take? Thinking about, how can we quickly pull the right people together to turn that momentum from Prop 5 passing into real housing solutions? What do you suggest to accelerate the impact right away?
Well, I think first thing we do if Prop 5 passes, everyone goes and celebrates a little bit because I know there's a lot of great work from people going on here, and if we're going to believe the polling we saw, this thing is going to be close. So hopefully that means everyone who's here is talking to somebody, going out, getting a volunteer opportunity, certainly voting, encouraging people to vote. And I think that's what we're going to need to be in this scenario. But after that, I mean, it really does open up the possibilities. So I think we need to have community conversations about with this greater local control, what's the next step we can take? And I think we need to have that about a lot of different community issues because we know we have a lot of community needs, but just speaking around affordable housing and homelessness, which is where we live and love it, some of us are already kind of starting to think out loud about what possibilities there are. And, it's still going to take a lot of work. We're still talking about needing to get consensus from the community on it. When we start talking about what are some ways that we can start really scaling the solutions that we have seen work in our community at the level we need and how we can all work together to see what that could look like. And I think that could look like a lot of different things. I think it's too premature to say on it, but it's a community conversation that we need to have. I know some of us are thinking about and starting to talk about, and we really want to accelerate forward because we have a crisis that is already severe enough. People are dying on our streets. People are being pushed out of their homes, and it's only going to get worse and more expensive to fix. So let's do everything we can now to get to that happy scenario where we're talking about post Prop 5 victory, and then really all start buckling down and saying, what is that next step and figuring that out together.
Well, David just said an important word, and that's building consensus. But I'll tell you my perspective as a member of Housing Community Development Commission. I saw a list when we did a reallocation of Measure E. I saw a list of projects that were ready to go, a dozen projects. We were able to fund 4. We're talking about projects that are ready to go right now. All they need is sufficient funding. And for me personally, that was heartbreaking to know this is something that could get underway, could start housing people immediately. So I'll be, as the consensus building takes place, I'll be advocating for looking at what is ready to go. What can we get in the ground the fastest? So David, I hope that doesn't conflict with anything with your organization, but that's
great.
Thought.
I mean, I think that's just another important part about the stakes are so high, right? I mean, it's not just a big problem that we know we need to solve, but we've actually built up a lot of great shovel-ready projects, initiatives ready to expand right now that we just don't have a way to do it now. So there is some urgency right now. There is a real opportunity cost if we can't accelerate those solutions. So the how, I think we have to figure out a lot of the how, but that's absolutely what we need to do. And unfortunately, our path to do it's going to be a lot narrower if we don't get back some more of this local control and accountability with Prop 5 first.
Amen. Amen. Amen.
Well, that is a great note to leave on. I am so grateful for both of you. I'm grateful for your work, your dedication, commitment, and the organizations that you represent. So with that, I'm going to thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And share appreciation for the audience for being so engaged. And I'll turn it over to Corey Wobach, who is our Civic Engagement Senior Associate.
Thank you so much, Regina. Well, there are less than 2 weeks left until the election. And if you want to make sure that this does become a reality so that we can have those day after conversations about how to take advantage of Prop 5, we're going to need your help because the polling shows this to be an extremely close race. I mean, the polling we've seen shows that this is really in the margin of error, or some people call it the margin of effort. If we don't put in a lot of work between now and election day, it could very well not pass. And if we put in a lot of work between now and election day, there's a good chance it will pass, and we need it to pass. So what we're asking everybody to do is sign up to volunteer. So Emily has just dropped in the chat a link to volunteer, and there's also a QR code on the screen. There are a lot of volunteer opportunities to phone bank and canvass between now and election day. But I want to highlight a special day of action that we're having tomorrow. So share this with your friends. Don't just sign up for yourself. Let your friends, your neighbors, your coworkers, your family know. We're doing this tomorrow morning from 10 to 1. We'll provide training and lunch. So You don't need to have any experience to show up and help out. We're going to be canvassing. There will also be a phone banking option as well. If you're not sure about going out door to door, you could also do some phone banking. But we're going to try and get out there on the doors and talk to voters and have real conversations with people. Make sure that they remember to vote, that they are excited to vote, and make sure that before they cast their ballots, that they know about Prop 5 and they don't overlook it as they're completing their ballots. So please do join us tomorrow. The link to that is also in the chat. And whether or not you can join us tomorrow, please do sign up for other chances to volunteer before Election Day, because we don't want to wake up the day after the election and have it fail by just a handful of votes and think, oh, if only I'd gotten out there and volunteered, maybe I could have made the difference. So thank you, and
Corey.
see you tomorrow.
Thank you so much. And I wanted to just highlight a couple of events that we have coming up. We have our annual holiday party, which is a Happy Housers event on Wednesday, December 4th at Mama Ken in San Jose. That's going to be a great time together. There's going to hopefully be a lot of celebrating happening, as David mentioned earlier. So please plan to join us, register, share it with your colleagues and friends, and join us. And we also have an event from the League of Women Voters that we will also drop in the chat. Roma, did you want to mention that?
Just to let you know, and thank you, Corey, for mentioning how close this election is on Prop 5. It's very, very close. So we've had a request to put together an event to just a slightly different slant. We're featuring Matt Regan, who is Vice President for Policy at Bay Area Council, who's going to talk about why business is supporting it, and then a representative, Heather Hood, who's a VP at Community Enterprise Community Partners. So hope you can all join us, and particularly please reach out to your undecideds, people, the skeptics out there, because this will be a good chance to hear a slightly different take. Thank you. Thank you so much, SV at Home.
Thank you. And we also, I want to just share that we believe everyone deserves a safe, stable home here at SV at Home. And if you do too, we invite you to join us as a member. When you join SV at Home, together, we work to build and sustain a movement for affordable housing, because we are stronger together than we ever can be in isolation. Because you are so important to us, we want membership to be open and accessible. So there's not a minimum. Please pay whatever you can, but please become a member and support our work. Your member helps support work like this. And you can find the link in the chat. Together, we can work towards solving the Bay Area's housing crisis. And we also have a short poll that we would love for you to provide your feedback in. We really appreciate you participating in this poll. Just take a minute to complete it and let us know how we're doing. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for being a part of this conversation, and we'll see you at the next event.